Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. We have back with us today Greg Soulje. Welcome, Greg. Great to see you.
Right here, Sarah. Nice to see you. Hope everyone is all in well here on at least in our Chicagoland area. The sun has finally come on out, and I'm sure there are folks in the Corn Belt that are climbing for a little more sun and a little more dry time, especially in some of the wetter areas of the complex over the past couple of weeks.
So the big question, did you see the Northern Lights? I mean, we were all supposed to see those this past weekend. I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't get to see them. I tried.
I have silly, stupid early hours. I'm in the radio business, so the start of my day sometimes is 2:30, 3:30, and I'm usually face down in the mashed potatoes by 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening. I don't invite me to a party 'cause I'll talk weather and then fall asleep after 8. So, but no, I did not get a chance to see it. Got the glasses. I did see the eclipse. And so that was pretty spectacular. That was cool.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't order enough glasses. Handed them out, and I'm like, wait, I didn't get any glasses, so I didn't chance that one. But
Well, I'm here and I can see pretty well. The glasses I ordered worked fantastic, and like I said, it was quite a sight, and a pretty wild year for astronomical events here on good old Earth.
we want to welcome all of you that are joining us here online. If you have any questions for Greg as we go through this program, please feel free to post those in the chat. If you're joining us from social media, you can just post those directly in your channel. So, Greg, let's just jump into it. You mentioned a little bit about how, some farmers are maybe having a little too much water, some maybe not enough. What are we looking at? I know we kind of always like to start with a drought update.
Yes, exactly. It's once again, it's another season, another example that we have gone in some areas of the Midwest, and we saw that over in the Mid-South and Lower Mississippi Valley Delta region from a drought to a flood. This time, it's applied to sections of the Corn Belt, and just again to put things into perspective, we saw this chart here back when we got together last month, and again, it's just we bring it up for comparison's sake, particularly as it applies to the Corn Belt and down through Dixie and the Tennessee Valley. There we are in early December, and coming off a snow drought for the upper Midwest areas near the Canadian border. Limited snow cover and one of the warmer winters on record across the Midwest. And typically when you get moisture in the wintertime season, you should be getting it over the Deep South and Dixie and through the Tennessee Valley. That was absent as well. So that's a snapshot of the U.S. Drought Monitor on early December. Move to early May. This is last week's monitor. And there it is. Well, look at the dramatic improvement in especially the Western Corn Belt areas. It's still lingering, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Ankeny, just to name a few towns into eastern Iowa, but a categorical improvement from extreme to exceptional down to basically a moderate drought situation in Iowa. And there's actually an area south of I-80 near the Missouri border back into southeastern Nebraska that has been overtly wet. You can see actually in the southeast Iowa where there's no mention of drought, virtually nothing in Illinois, over much of the eastern Corn Belt, some improvement too into the northern Corn Belt and even areas of the plains. And it's a dichotomy of soil moisture, too much standing water in some of the winter wheat fields of eastern Kansas, and you get west of Wichita, really west of Oklahoma City, Wichita line, where the dryness and drought continues to be a story, and into West Texas, cotton, and parts of New Mexico. Southeastern part of the country, great shape. Same with the northeast of New England. And there's been some modest improvement to the dryness and drought through the Dakotas and out through parts of Big Sky country. I think it was 2 weeks ago where there was some widespread significant moisture, including snow, of an inch or two out of Montana and across North Dakota. So probably some spring grain planting delays, but nominal at best in another year, Sarah, where there's been no significant flooding going on across areas of the Red River Valley of the North. So that's the latest drought monitor. And yeah, in some areas, it's been too much of a good thing. And we can certainly point towards maybe the far southern Corn Belt area, south of I-64, in that southern Iowa corridor, and in particular, Missouri, which we saw the drought monitor from December was in a world of hurt. Now, too much of a good thing in some of those southwesternmost Corn Belt locales.
Of course, some of that precipitation has come with a lot of tornadic activity. I mean, we've seen it's just been crazy what the last few weeks have had.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of locales, actually, one particular town in Oklahoma, east of Oklahoma City, that had two direct hits to tornadic activity within about a 10 to 12 day time frame. So yeah, it's been a rough one. And if you note down in eastern Texas as well, they went from dryness and drought to some of those rice fields are flooded, if you could imagine that. I think we had a gentleman in on This Week in Agribusiness standing in one of the overtly wet and flooded out rice fields in eastern Texas. And this year there'll be hopefully an abundance of sugarcane in Louisiana, where last year there was nothing going on. I think that was burned out with dryness and drought even into the Delta region.
What else you got for us, Greg?
Okay, here we go. It's really, this is the general consensus, the Fed's thinking, and we have no disagreements with that. Matter of fact, I think it's lined up pretty well on the long range stuff from This Week in Agribusiness. You can see those shades of green and olive into the western Corn Belt areas of Iowa through Nebraska and Kansas. This is really the next couple of weeks for the remainder of the month of May, and sort of an example of this forecast is verified. We've seen improvement into those western Corn Belt locales. Great Plains areas, maybe not necessarily so great out into the Arrowhead of Minnesota. And then if we go forward here over the next, what was the 90-day outlook, this will take us through the end of July. And again, kind of concurs with our thinking, maybe a little bit too aggressive as we get later into June and July. But the general idea continues to be no drought development in the eastern Corn Belt, further improvement in the western sections, and even some westward movement on drought improvement into some of the where still dry areas, the high plains of Kansas and Oklahoma. Those drought areas in the Southwest stay. Same with Big Sky Country. So basically from the divide on East Sarah, there should be a continuation of an erosion of what's lingering in drought, and it may turn out to be in some areas probably too much of a good thing.
But still, we're probably looking at a fairly good growing season, I would think, overall. I mean, we're still got a little time to get some crops in the ground, and hopefully any kind where it's really wet, it's going to correct itself and allow them to do that. But
Yeah, I think so. I think by and large, and we've been peddling the fact, I think when we last got together, that there would be, we'd be probably somewhere within a general acceptable range of the usual 5-year averages for getting corn in and beans in. We've seen some areas a little bit ahead of that curve. Some have slipped in a fair amount in the western and southwestern Corn Belt, a bit below and behind that. Matter of fact, from the USDA briefing this morning, in Illinois, as of this date, 42% of the corn in the ground versus the 5-year average of 56%. So that's a further decline there, but within range. We usually can typically make up for this in a hurry. Beans kind of right at the 5-year average, 39% of the ground, 43 is the average. And probably suspect there's worser numbers west and southwest of Illinois, and better numbers as you get up through Michigan, parts of Indiana, as well as Ohio.
Yeah, they get those big planters out. They can take quite a few acres out in a very short period of time.
Well, yeah, I remember getting into this weather business a few decades ago. And boy, if you had something like this, the rains that we've had, that would immediately start pushing planting back into mid to late June or scrubbing it for the year. But yeah, the technology, the equipment change, and this go around, you can get it cleaned up and wiped out probably within about a week or 10-day time frame at the worst. So yeah, the technology and improvements to equipment have really been to our benefit and producers' benefit especially.
Exactly. So what else we got?
Okay, here we talk about El Nino, and the general thought is, and we're seeing that at least in some of our in-shop forecasting techniques. Yeah, it's winding down. I think personally, it's winding down quicker and faster than anyone is letting on to. At least some of the correlation, the in-house technology and methodologies that we do here in the office. I think we're moving a little quicker and faster into that. In any event, here is sort of what we call an anomaly, or the range above or below average of sea surface temperatures. This is the Central Pacific. You can see Mexico and South America to the right and get out towards Indonesia. And here's Australia in the southwestern corner. And you do see a little sliver of some cooling beginning to show up into the eastern Pacific. The central and western areas continue generally at 1 to 3 degrees above average. You just need to be a degree above average, and you're either El Nino or degree below that, you're in La Nina. So we are transitioning transitioning to what we call a neutral state. And the general consensus, this is a lot of modeling, but it kind of backs up what we're thinking, but maybe we're going to be a little more aggressive, at least in shop here and on the TV show and on radio. But we do see a significant climb, and so do the feds here, a decline on sea surface temperatures by January, February. I think it maybe comes sooner than that. And I think we will obviously see a change in the atmosphere and a change in the weather pattern. And we think that's already underway with the degree of rainfall that's been coming down across a good part of the heartland. So, you know how we typically, if you're going to, we made this anomaly last time we got together, if you're going to build an equipment shed, you got to dig out the ground, you got to lay the footings, the foundation, you build that on up. That's the way we kind of do weather around here. So if we're going to talk about the longer stuff, let's lay the groundwork. And here's a spaghetti chart over the next 5 days, at least through the 22nd, I should say, of May. And these green lines are just basically the winds up aloft at various levels of the atmosphere. And you can pick out the highs and the lows, the dips or troughs, the arcing curvature to the lines, perhaps in through Mexico and the Texas region and Gulf Coast or ridges. And the jet stream is in from a southwest or west-southwest direction. There's quite a range of these numbers from northwest to southeast. So there's some cold air up aloft. There's heat and a capped off atmosphere in the Gulf Coast region. And so it's pretty much classic mid to late spring setup of heat building over the southern states. Another prod of lingering El Nino coolness into the Canadian Prairie and the Pacific Northwest. Matter of fact, the Pacific Northwest has been a part of the country that's been lagging in moisture. They're already into runoff season off the Cascades. So more moisture there with that little low coming into the Pacific Northwest next week would be of great benefit. And the surface chart might be a little bit tough to pick out, but really just portrays a frequency about every 2 to 3 days. And we have no reason to believe this is going to really wind down anytime soon, at least into the beginning part of June, of systems to come through. You get 2.5, 3 days of dry time and some decent drying, not out of control, not excessive. And then you get into another round of moisture, nothing out of control, nothing excessive. So the beat goes on. You probably, if you're already wet, you may stay on the wetter side of the pendulum here through the end of the month. And if you're on the somewhat normal, better to manage or drier side of the pendulum, you'll probably stay that way here for the remainder of May and into early June. And here is basically the next 7 days kind of laid out, and you can see the scale to the left. Those purple and deeper red areas and blue areas are indicative of maybe an inch or two, but that's spread over, 1 to 2, at least over about a week's time frame. And we've had the tendency of late, and we get into this time of the year, Sarah, where we begin to see, these rains take on a little more clustered effect, where all of a sudden you get these downpours of an inch or two, and the rest of that weather system is pretty benign for your particular part of the country or area. Others maybe are a little more garden variety on a frequent basis. So we're kind of beginning to get that pendulum where it's these either all or nothing type rains in 1 or 2 occurrences. Could be good news for planting operations, could be not the greatest of news for folks who are still maybe in a wetter mode right now. But that's the scenario here for the next 7 days. The moisture pattern continues on. I know in previous get-togethers with us here, we had been kind of thinking, well, maybe a little on the drier side here and certainly cooler side. But again, our in-house stuff is beginning to see the signs of maybe a little more action continuing on the next couple of 2 or 3 weeks. And then the steady demise of El Nino around here as we get later on into the summertime season.
What about temperatures? You mentioned precipitation. You got something on temps here?
Well, we do.
Walk us through that?
Yeah, we will. As a matter of fact, over the next 6 to 10 days and 8 to 14 days, once again, back to these spaghetti type charts, the steering currents, the dip in the western part of the country, a little dip in the Pacific. It's a southwest to northeast jet stream flow up aloft. And we're basically looking at temperatures maybe a few degrees below average up near the Canadian border, a few degrees above average as you get down to that maybe Interstate 40 corridor in the southern plains, and a capped off atmosphere. So that's signs and indications of heat and usual mid to late springtime heat getting to build across the Gulf Coast and in through the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. And this is the Fed's perspective here through the 24th of May. And there's that heat through Texas, maybe redevelopment or increase in dryness and drought there. The atmosphere too warm up aloft to make rainfall. And you've got readings are expected to be a few degrees degrees below average into the Pacific Northwest. So it helps to deliver this particular setup. We have no qualms with this. And unfortunately, it's more wet weather. Now, the degree of rainfall, the coverage, the occurrence of these weather systems, really the details are really there. They'll be needed for how you portray and plan your planning operations and fieldwork operations here going forward. Just because you're paintbrushed with above average moisture doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be out of the fields or everything comes down at once, but just kind of portrays a more frequent weather pattern of weather systems on the move and really out through the end part of the month. No significant change. Moisture where they need it in the Pacific Northwest in that little buckle trough, if you will, in the western part of the country. The ridge is over the southern United States. It's warm up aloft. You can't get the clouds to grow. And so there's at least a heat source down there over the Gulf Coast areas. We'll see what transpires when we take a look at our longer range and how that will play out on temperatures around here in the coming days. Quickly, though, on to temps there, Sarah. You can see little change, cool into the Pacific Northwest, down through California, through the upper Midwest as well. Heat through the southern states. When you get that range of temperatures, the weather pattern tends to be active. And again, so we kind of see the tendency towards a wetter scenario. And we'll keep an eye on how planning progress numbers go around here and the degree and stature and type of rain that comes on through, whether these convective downpours of an inch or two all of a sudden or more spread out, a little more evenly distributed. But in any event, looks like we'll continue on. No sign of drought, additional drought improvement. Maybe that's the best way to spin it in the Western Corn Belt and back into the plains.
We just need those light all-day rains is what we need, right? Get those crops in the ground and give us some nice soaking rains.
Yeah, some rain at night, warms up and dries out by day, and you keep it in, the usual garden variety. In reality, average and the folks at, I believe it was the Illinois State Water Survey, have actually put together, at least for this part of the Midwest, as part of the Corn Belt, what is an average week's worth of wet weather? What is there? We keep track of temperature and wind and all that, frost and freeze days. Well, typically it's about a half to 3/4 of an inch of rain each week. That's normal. So if you're on that or maybe closer to an inch each week, you're pretty much looking at still a very normal rainfall pattern for this point of the springtime season. So I know folks are going to see this, and there's probably going to think some worsening of some of those 5-year averages, or at least planting progress numbers compared to the 5-year averages, but not a scenario where we're doing widespread replanting or we're planting, mid to late June over parts of the Corn Belt. So as I've been telling folks on the radio, keep the faith and hang in there.
There you go. You think we're pretty much over the risk of any kind of super cold temperatures, don't you? I mean, looking at things. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Matter of fact, we'll kind of roll into the longer range stuff around here. And here's our scenario. Very little change. This cold air is not unusual for the Dakotas, the Southern Canadian Prairie. If there might have been some emergence on the spring grain side, there may be a little burn back there. This is not a frost freeze setup around here. This is really driven by the fact there'll be a fair amount of cloud cover relative to mid to late May. And so temperatures as a result, and that little trough over the middle part of the country too, expected to be below average. Now you get into the precip pattern, and again, you get that range of temperatures that sets up a strengthening jet stream. The wind's up aloft. You converge them at the surface, you lift the air, and you get disturbances to track along it. So the scenario continues to be good news for the West, the Great Plains in particular, some of the worst drought areas, and maybe not the greatest of news. But again, we've gone from a drought to a flood. We're just trying to find some equilibrium here, but there's more wet weather centered on the central Corn Belt areas from Iowa, Missouri, across Illinois, and into the eastern Great Lakes region. More normalized over the Carolinas and dry under that hot ridge over the Gulf Coast area. So do the best you can. Again, this does not necessarily mean you're going to be out of fields, or we're looking at some big field work delays. Just looks like above frequency of weather systems and moisture that will probably tend a little above average around here. That could very well be closer to an inch of rain on average for a good part of the central Corn Belt and the Central Plains on average. So if you want to look at it again, you're getting good subsoil moisture and additional drought relief here as we head through the remainder, or at least into mid-May. Now, late May here, as we get into the end part of the month, the beginning part of June, Sarah, you can see that cool air that was in the western states. It's moving. So better news that we do have at least a progressive weather pattern with a little prod of some cool air, no frost or freeze into the upper Midwest and the northern Great Lakes region. Temperatures are normalized across the Corn Belt back into the plains, and we're kind of keeping some of the heat fragmented in the western and southwestern part of the country, and basically from the Ohio River Valley on southward. And there's a little slight west and southward jog on some of the more significant rains, but again, drought relief, timely rains for the southern end of the spring grains, the heart of the winter wheat belt, down through at least parts of the northern Delta region. And one area that is a little drier than usual is across the southern regions of the mid-Atlantic region and the Carolinas. So, and dry time back in for the upper Midwest, northern Corn Belt. So we're back to either normal to a little above across the Corn Belt, or drying out where we probably would need it at this point in the upper Midwest. So all in all here, we go for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I still think it's a manageable, not ideal, but still a very much manageable setup of planting opportunities for much of the Corn Belt.
Did I see something where we were getting more smoke down from some of the forest fires? I thought there was something last week that it seemed very hazy, at least here. Oh, Minneapolis. I saw some pictures from up there. It was really smoked in, I guess you
remember
say.
we talked about that last time we met, and then I think during the course of that last summertime season that there were still areas, the boreal forest regions of far northwestern, the Northwest Territories of Canada. There were still some localized fires going on there, and it was a dry winter season through the southern Canadian prairie. And we talked about that last month, and we've mentioned on the TV show that we may not see the degree that we saw last summertime season, but probably with this scenario here, there will continue to be pockets that are going to have to be watched, and probably still some element of smoke issues. Again, not the degree where we were talking about, the lack of really a crop growth and development. But as you pointed out, there'll be pockets, I think, that will still be into play here as we move on through the next couple of months out of the Canadian prairie.
What you got some more for us here?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to actually take a look here for the rest of summertime into July. A quick little snapshot in August as well, and maybe a little commentary down the line here on the tropical weather season. There is the hot ridge everybody talks about, and we see that beginning to materialize here. We're going to get these wide fluctuating air masses and changes in the steering currents. That's another indicator, along with the kind of technology and technique, we should say, in our longer range approach, that it's maybe a little quicker, faster demise of El Nino and a quicker transition into La Nina across the country. Sometimes La Ninas, if they get going in the mid to late summer, they tend to portray a hotter, drier scenario. We're not completely seeing that quite yet. We're still a little more bullish on moisture, but in any event, probably by this time, and you don't want anything out of control. And this kind of brings, when you see this much above average scenario, that's, triple digit heat. It's not obviously in the Corn Belt, but in the wheat areas, but still there may be some corn and soybeans to contend with it. You'll have to watch the root development on these things. They're going to sit in water essentially for a few weeks and then take off from there with the building warmth. And, we don't want a scenario where we completely shut the rains off. In any event, you see welcome heat for parts of the Corn Belt, the western states, a little leftover cool air into the northeast of New England, and taking us through the mid to late portions of the month of June. The weather pattern kind of, this is almost like what we call the ring of fire setup, the fire represented by the heat, the hot ridge that we saw there on the panel prior, and then systems, you get these storm clusters that ride on the periphery of the jet. They're able to tap down momentum, and sometimes they end up being these, green snap type of thunderstorm outbreaks with, 100-mile-an-hour thunderstorm winds and large hail. Not that we haven't seen that already into parts of the plains and far southern Corn Belt locales, but we'll keep an eye on the storm potential. But at least there'll be a tendency for additional moisture into the northern and eastern parts of the Corn Belt, maybe some of the areas that will have a more normalized rainfall season. Otherwise, normal moisture for the Corn Belt, and the dry time is back in the Ozarks and into areas of the southwestern high plains and the southern reaches of the plains too. Into early July, another realignment here with the cool air kind of retrogrades. The ridge collapses briefly, and we get a quick shot of more normalized early July temperatures, still pushing, low to mid 80s as far north as maybe Interstate 80, about 90-ish into the southern Corn Belt, southern plains. typical stuff, and there'll probably be some mid to upper 90s in the southern reaches of the country, the southeastern states. Again, not all that unusual for early July, and warmth over the western and northwestern parts of the country. Again, in that dip, we probably will see a transition to maybe a quick line or two of showers and thunderstorms, and some of these will probably be timely for the eastern Corn Belt, probably as well for that western area and the eastern flank of some of that heat that they would have seen here during late June into the Plain States and southwestern Corn Belt locale. So there is one shift in the weather pattern going through the remainder of July. This is where we get stronger indications that there's some building heat issues with a quicker demise of La Nina. So here we go, and we'll see how these roots and the technologies putting into seeds are able to go from too much wet weather sitting in water to a little more timely iffy rain, and then the rains become a little more sporadic, and then you're dealing with this kind of stuff, which is probably mid 90s up to the Twins, mid to upper 90s into parts of the central and southern Corn Belt and the Plain States area. So there is the infamous hot ridge over the middle part of the country. And again, still running the crest, the periphery, the northern extent of that hot ridge, strong winds up aloft, thunderstorm occurrences. So there will be some degree of rain. It may come at a price. And the rest of the Corn Belt back into the plains, normal moisture with the exception of, again, western Kansas, Oklahoma, and the southwestern reaches of the country. So that's the July scenario. Get into a quick snapshot on August around here. And that cool air is still lingering over the Great Lakes region. If you were open up a classic meteorology textbook, this is kind of the way temperatures tend to portray themselves over the heartland this time of the year. A little cool air trough over the Great Lakes of New England. The jet stream not terribly strong. The heat, if you will, builds through California, Gulf Coast areas and down through Texas. And, moisture tends to be a little more lacking, normal to maybe below into August. And that could be a scenario that actually gets going even into late July. Things do get muddled. We'd be perfectly honest with you. Things are getting muddled sometime in the third week to fourth week of July. So this is something that we'll keep an eye on out for getting into August and beyond. It could be, in some scenario where, the heat would be welcome from a growing degree standpoint, dry down, moisture reduction. If we can get it to work out correctly, I think certainly by late summertime, early August, early autumn, we're into La Nina. That could portray a better scenario of, again, crop maturity and development and dry down and moisture reduction and all that. And hopefully with this moisture pattern as well that we see later into summertime, that'll help some of the late planted beans. So things getting a little more muddled mid to late summertime. We do know La Nina is coming our way. We expect a quick transition into La Nina, certainly no later than autumn, but certainly in the mid to late summertime, I think we'll begin to feel the effects of that. La Nina and autumn and harvest tend to be, character building harvest seasons. We'll leave it at that. I know we're how many months out from that, and things change, and they're probably thinking what's Soulje talking about. But the bullet points go with La Nina, late spring, late summer, early autumn, and some harvest issues that begin to materialize with time. So we'll worry about that here in the months to come.
Right. When we talk next month, we'll get that update. Did you have something on tropical weather, or did we cover that?
Well, just a comment that we're already seeing signs of some very warm water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, the Southwest Atlantic, the Caribbean. Last year, and we were down in Florida for a few days off, still doing radio, but still down in the Key Largo area of Florida. And those water temperatures down there were up between about 95 and 98 degrees. There was a massive coral reef kill off down there. And there is still, when we were down there, we actually stopped by the Tropical Prediction Center out there in Miami. And yeah, those water temperatures are already running about 5 to 10 degrees above average. So that plus a dying off El Nino, winds weaken up aloft. Tropical systems love weak environments, warm waters, and that hot high that we talked about over the Gulf Coast areas. And as long as we can keep Saharan sand and dust to a minimum, which we think we'll be able to do, those systems coming off the African coast could be pretty active ones. So right now, the thinking is a much higher than usual named number of storms off the Atlantic basin this year. I believe last year was the fourth busiest, even with an El Nino going on, the fourth busiest with getting down the alphabet of named storms across the open waters of the Atlantic. So it promises to be a busy season, I think, with a kill off of El Nino in the tropical basin of the Atlantic.
So that's what you do when you go on vacation as a weather guy. You go to the weather stations, the weather museums. Is that the thing?
Yeah, yeah. I figure we're going
Yeah.
to be down here. We're driving right by it, and I think it said University of Florida International, right there, National Hurricane Center, Storm Tropical Prediction Center. So we kind of stopped by. Couldn't officially get in. You got to get credentials. They only do,
Oh, wow.
But talk to a guy, a forecaster that came on out. So, that's the still ongoing nerd in me from age 12. So that's between you and I, nobody else.
Oh yeah, no, not our whole worldwide audience.
There you
here.
go. Yeah.
Any final observations or thoughts to leave our group with here today, Greg?
I like to tell people on the radio and some of my downstate radio stations and Danville and Champaign and on a big old farm network across the country. We'll hold hands, sing Kumbaya. We'll get through this together. Hang in there, keep the faith. Don't bail out on me yet.
Right. And if you want to catch Greg's weekly forecast,
Yes.
This Week in Agribusiness, RFD TV, and a bunch of other affiliated stations across the nation, plus you're on a number of radio stations across the country as well,
Yeah,
right?
300. Can I say Brownfield here?
Okay.
Okay, Brownfield Network. There are 6 downstate Illinois ones, but the station out of Danville actually has a free downloadable WITY radio app. If you want this version and the TV version on a daily basis, 3 times a day out of the station, you can download that app. They're out of Danville, Illinois. 35 hours of programming. Dave Brown and company down there have really built that station up.
Wow.
A very popular one. I know it's Danville, Illinois, but it's got a great following, and you can download their app and hear the weather guy there, along with Brownfield, and obviously on This Week in Agribusiness on, a couple of hundred TV stations and RFD and all that other stuff. So check us out each week. We have, by the way, that 4-week forecast every week on the show with Mike and company.
Yeah, and that's kind of a very unique forecast. You're not just taking a look at, when we go to our local news station, they're like tomorrow through Thursday is going to be this. And you're taking that really long range forecast, which is something you can't generally get just anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they're out there, and I know we did share stuff here that's out there on the web, because I know producers, they look at this stuff. And that's what makes it so cool when you're out at these farm shows and equipment shows. I don't get to them on like Max did, for example, just tied to the radio broadcast line and duties. It's tough to do that and get out and see people. But if they're around through the Midwest, they'll come up and talk weather with you, and they do know what they're looking at. There's so many models out there. I take a look at, I look at them, but the forecast is not based on them. It's really the way that Earl Finkel had taught us back how many years ago. But in any event, if there's 6 to 8 to 10 different versions of models, there's 6 to 8 to 10 different forecasts floating around out there. And the local people do a fine job with the local stuff. But this is really tailored to, medium range, longer range. That's the way the producer, the cattle operator, the seed generator, grain storage bin equipment, that's the way these guys and ladies plan and work to make their business successful. So that's what we try to do, because it's a source that you just don't have anywhere else other than right here with Farm Progress and on This Week in Agribusiness.
So we'll see Greg again next week. Greg Soulje, thank you so much for joining us here today.
A great visit with you, Sarah. Take care.
And we want to thank all of you for tuning in as well. You can go back and watch Greg's segment here. If you go to feedstuffs.com and click on Feedstuffs 365, you can share that with your colleagues and friends if you would like. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.